And first up is that 自然? Jianpeng, can you say something else?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
Oh, yes. I think this issue was discussed in the last week, but we have a conclusion for it. So I want to give a clear conclusion for it so I can make it forward. And also, I want to landing it in release one release. I want to
118.
release it. 118, yes. So I think it's only a experiment and a permanent feature. So is it safe? That's what I want to know. I want more feedback about it.
I'm sorry,
That's
what
all.
was that an ask?
So my question is, what should I do for this PR to make it forward? And also, is it accessible to landing in 118?
So I'm hearing two questions. So the second one is whether it can land in 118.
Yes.
Are you specifically talking about a mechanism to get it into 118, or asking for permission for it to get into 118?
Asking for permission.
Okay, and then what's the first question?
I think in the PR posting and Howard artist and discussing about what's the right way to support to guide, or say in how you would say, what's the right way for guide for experiment feature? Maybe Howard can.
You mean John Howard?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just asked Costin if he can join because it's, I mean, the main person that disagrees with me, I think, is Costin. So it will be a very one-sided discussion if he's not here. In my mind, the way that we have for experimental features and for everything else is global environment variables, and that seems like the pattern we should continue. But given the person that disagrees is not here, it's not really a fair argument. He hasn't seen my message, but says he's online, so I don't know if he's going to join or not. We talked a lot about it last week, but it was very high level, future looking, not scope to just, this one flag.
Okay, so maybe we should postpone this until Costin can join us, and hopefully sometime in the next hour or so. Would that be okay, Jianpeng?
Okay.
All right. So next item is John. You're on mute.
Yeah, I'm trying to see what this is. Oh, okay. This one probably also needs Costin, so hopefully. Well, it doesn't need him, but he also had comments. All right, yeah. Let's actually move on. We can go back to that one if he joins, but
all right,
we can discuss.
And then next up is Whitney.
Hi everyone. I can go ahead and present my screen.
Okay, please do.
Okay, awesome. Are you able to see my screen?
It's coming up. Yep. Can you enlarge the size a bit, because it's you have a wide screen and this is pretty squishy.
Yeah, I'm on a very large screen today. Awesome. Okay, great. So today I'm going to present the very early stages of my feature maturity and feature flagging proposal. This came out of several discussions I overheard as we were discussing safe mode, among other things. And I'm really hoping that I can present it now so I can get more feedback and context and direction from the community, as I'm pretty new to Istio and I'm using this to learn the different features. And I imagine everyone here has way more background on why certain things are a certain way. But to dive in, So as we know, Istio features are categorized as experimental, alpha, beta, or stable. But from what I was able to observe, there are a lot of features in Istio that do not fully meet the criteria for the given stage that they're in, or in general, they aren't really incentivized to attain feature maturity or deprecation. So this proposal is proposing changes to like harden the criteria for each feature stage and to like streamline the feature graduation process and the overall feature life cycle management. So TLDR, we are hoping that in proposing these changes and actually implementing it, we can improve our overall feature hygiene so that we can all trust that features in a given stage fits that criteria, and that criteria is pretty sufficient compared to other projects like Kubernetes. And we are also actively driving features up or out of Istio. So in regards to like feature management, as of now, like I said, there aren't any. I guess we can all agree that Istio is an open source project that we actually want to see feature completion in, and to ensure that the features we continue to work on is the best solution that we know of right now that addresses like our users' needs. So we need to be active in making sure that the features actually evolve in maturity and it stays relevant. And I believe that requires some oversight from the TOC, and I'm actually proposing maybe even delegating this oversight to a new working group focused on feature management and enhancements. And what that working group will be responsible for is like reviewing feature maturity. So what that looks like is, I believe that when we see what stage of feature is in, that indicates to the user what is expected or what they can expect Istio to follow through on, or what behavior they expect, right? And right now we have requirements checklists that we track in like an enhancement template in this enhancement folder I'm sure that everyone knows of. And from what I can tell, there are 52 overall features in Istio, and I'm able to tell that from this features.yaml that is also held in the enhancement folder. But as I review like what's in enhancements versus features.yaml, I notice, there are like 35 out of 52 features that actually have an enhancement checklist doc. So I'm curious, and I see John already responded, if there were any specific reason behind that. And if so, or if not, I believe that we do need to put effort into, I see Eric's hand. Give me 1 second. I do believe we need to put effort in utilizing enhancements proactively. Based on John's comment, I gathered there was like a lot of backfilling of the features over time. But ideally, we want to use the enhancement docs to be the main source of truth to track the life cycle of the features and help with graduation and reviewing the fact that the features are meeting the expected criteria. Eric, you can go ahead.
Okay, so I think, and I don't know if this answers your question or not, but probably 2 years ago now, there's a bunch of PRs that are in that repo that have checklists in them that have not merged. I believe they were out there for the various work group leads to review the checklists because Miriam had just done the work and generated the checklist, and then basically left it for the work group leads to approve that the checklists were correct, and then they would be merged. So that might answer the question of why there's some missing. Some of those might be in those PRs. I don't know. I don't know if it's all 17 that are missing, but maybe a good share of them are covered that way.
Thanks for bringing that up. Do you have any idea on what will be needed to get those PRs merged? Well, I guess what I can do.
Like I said, I thought, again, this has been a while now. I thought the process at the time was for the various work group leads to verify those features. The checklists were correct for those features. But I mean, I'm certainly sure we could probably review them as a group or do something different to get them in.
Sounds good. Yep, I'll take this into consideration. Okay, let's see, where were we? So yeah, I believe we all agree that the enhancements checklist should be like the source of truth. And moving beyond that, I believe that we need a regular practice of ensuring that our feature hygiene is up to its standard. So that means some form of a regular cadence around reviewing like all the features, and like referencing their enhancement stock to ensure that it is where it needs to be. And of course, this can be done through every PR that is created in regards to that feature. What are your thoughts on that? Like, is this something that we actually want, like a regular cadence around reviewing all the features? And then I also note that there are certain criteria within different stages that can also have like a different and separate review cadence and process. If no one has thoughts now, feel free to leave any comments on the doc and I can continue on. But as of now, I imagine that when we do regularly review these features, we are looking at like ensuring that the related bugs are tracked and resolved, figuring out ways on how to incorporate user feedback in the feature roadmap, ensuring that the test coverage actually grew with the feedback and the bugs that we came across, as well as like the documentation continues to grow as well. This is a list that is not complete, so I do appreciate any feedback here. And then moving on to the next step is the graduation, which I think is really important for us to ensure that the features we are working on continues to progress in stages or is deprecated based on an experimental feature being no longer relevant. So I believe that working group I mentioned that may be responsible for doing this will be responsible for driving the graduation of these features. And some benefits for doing this is there's especially when features reach beta, there aren't any solid incentive for it to be promoted to stable because it's getting all the benefits of stable minus that. And we want to ensure that we keep a forward momentum up through the stages because that is what is giving us the feedback around like, is the feature still relevant and is it maturing appropriately? But that's the high level across like the graduation, the hygiene, and like the management of it. And this table is where I'm actively going through the features, going through our criteria, and like pretty much pulling out the different things that we may want to address or change or backfill. And let's see. The other part of, is there any comments on like the feature maturity? Okay. The other part of this proposal is around feature flags. So as we know, feature flags are a gate of sorts that allow us or allow users to enable or disable experimental features. Specifically, right now, our features, feature flags, we have a lot of feature flags. They're currently environment variables and only configurable at installation. We want to put effort into reviewing the existing feature flags that Istio has because it's it's a lot of flags and some of the flags are very granular And we want to look for opportunities in which we can streamline the feature flagging process so that it can be ideally the sole API used to enable features at the experimental alpha level and potentially even beta. So with that, let's see. Also in introducing feature flags, we want to ensure that we actually stay on top of the life cycle of the feature flags. Ideally, as the feature flag is associated with moves through the different stages, that feature flag evolves as well, with the intention that when that feature gets to stable, the feature flag is deprecated and becomes non-operational. This section is attempting to figure out what is the right timeline, or how long do we need to keep a feature flag around based on the different graduation between different stages. As of now, I went based on the Kubernetes standard. I'm curious to see what we think about these different proposed times. And yeah, so at a high level, that's what I'm currently working on. I'm continuing at this moment. My action plan is continuing to understand what feature status and flags look like in Istio compared to Kubernetes and other projects we respect, as well as actually deep diving into our current features, what stages they're in, if there's any room for beefing up the criteria of those stages, as well as beefing up the features to meet that stage. And that's all I have for today. I also have several questions for the community, but I really hope that this is relevant, and please add your comments to the doc. And if there's no questions, I can stop sharing my screen.
Whitney, is the GitHub pull request also under this topic?
Yes. So this was my initial changes proposed. It's not necessarily too complicated. It was more like cleaning up of grammatical errors, and there were 2 criteria that was duplicated. So this is an open pull request that I have right now in relation to this proposal. Yeah. So if anyone can put their eyes on it, that'd be great. Yeah.
You were started before I raised my hand.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, so we've had similar proposals to this a couple of times. I may have missed this because I joined a bit late. What are we doing in this situation to address the fact that we've had similar processes in the past that we've just not really followed through on because we have no single person that's kind of guiding them. Even though I think that we had, even on the previous attempts, we had somebody who tried to take responsibility for it. But are we proposing a single point of contact that's going to be driving this? Is that going to be you?
Yes, I believe that can be me for now, but ideally we do want to set up a working group around it. But for now, as I am owning this proposal, I'm definitely interested in driving to ensure that we have the right process in place and that we can actually maintain that process.
Okay, cool. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good ideas here, and there's certainly a need for this. The thing that concerns me a bit is how we actually make it happen. We have a bit of a problem in Istio in general that we have a large community, but realistically, there's actually a pretty small amount of maintenance done on Istio. So the incentive of a vendor traditionally has been to dump whatever they need as alpha or even experimental, start using it in their product, productionize it if they need to internally or while it's experimental and alpha, and that's it. If we add all these processes about requirements to move up. I'm just not sure, like, it seems like we need some enforcement mechanism or incentive mechanism to actually ensure that that happens. Otherwise, we'll have a lot of process that's not being followed, is my concern. So.
Go ahead, Keith. Do you want to respond to John or something?
Yeah, sure. So this enforcement mechanism kind of gets to some of the ideas that were tossed around in the whole safe mode proposal. What Whitney's kind of proposing here is I like it because it's taking a lot of the feedback that we've gotten around safe mode and made it more focused towards just cleaning up and reinforcing what already exists in Istio as far as process. When it came to enforcement, I think Whitney had some ideas about this in the doc. There are a couple of different options depending on what we think is going to be required in order to make it actually happen. Like the just enough force principle, where you don't want to be draconian and overbearing, but you do want to trigger some sort of oversight every so often to make sure things are following the process. And so that can mean maybe you only there's a limited number of there's a limited amount of time that you can stay in a specific stage without triggering some sort of review. Maybe you I don't think because you drop any features necessarily, but I mean if you've been experimental for 2 years, that's not a great user experience. People, Hiram's Law or that XKCD comic, if it exists in some API form, people are going to use it, and that's not good for people to be using things that are perpetually experimental. If people, it's mentioned in the past that sometimes these features have champions that build it, and then for one reason or another they're no longer involved with Istio or working on something different. That's not something that instills confidence either for users. And so I'm to John's specific point, I'm in favor of enforcement. At the moment, I believe the only body that has that enforcement capability is TOC. The problem with that is that there would be so much required of TOC in order to really make this work that perhaps that would need to be delegated to some group, not necessarily a working group, but maybe some group to trigger these sorts of things. But yeah, I'm in favor of enforcement. We've chatted through this a couple of times with safe mode and other stuff. It just depends on what the community is comfortable with for what aid we're trying to meet.
Yeah, one thing that may be useful too is Kubernetes has a lot of processes. We should see what they like and don't like. I like copying, especially in this area. So they may have some suggestions on, and they do a lot of this community type stuff as well in terms of incentivizing contributions and whatnot. So I'm sure there's lots we could learn from them as well. It is also trickier adding this on afterwards. Like it's a bit easier if we say, hey, your new feature that's experimental needs to promote to beta within a year, whatever we say. It's a bit harder to say, hey, the experimental DNS allocation feature that's been experimental for 2.5 years, you have 6 months to make it stable or we're going to delete it or something, right? Those are very different claims.
I agree. I'm taking a lot of note from how Kubernetes does stuff. And hopefully, as we continue discussing this, we can find the right balance between draconian management versus like making the community happy and still interested in contributing.
So I've got a quick question before we move on. Do we have any action items for Whitney? Is the action item just for the community to provide more input in the doc? Is there anything here that anybody would like to see happen between now and next meeting?
I don't have anything in particular. I think I and everyone else should go through the doc and scope it out, but I don't have anything directly action items before the next meeting, personally.
Okay, great. Thank you.
But I do think a lot of this is, well, there's the what the processes should be and how we incentivize those processes is a huge aspect. We can have perfect process, but if we don't have people that want to follow the process, then it doesn't help, right?
Yeah.
Okay, do we have anything else on this topic? All right, I take that as a no. And it looks like Costin is still not here. So can we make material progress on the two previous topics without Costin?
We can. Yeah, we can. Let's do mine first, because I think Hassan had a meeting till 9:30, so it's possible he'll join in a minute. All right, so this was a PR that is well over a year old at this point. We kept trying to revive it and getting lost, so I figured I'd bring it up synchronously so we could discuss it and try and make some progress, as I think this is useful. And I've had, since the PR was open, a lot of people come ask me that they really want this to, for various use cases. So the idea of this is right now we add a bunch of different headers for various things. We add X forwarded client certificate. We add some like X envoy retry attempt. We add, I don't know, there's a list of like 8 headers in there or something. We set the server header to envoy or Istio proxy, I forget which one. All these various things. And users might not want that. Like in general, when we're doing HTTP proxying, we're not 100% transparent, but we can be more transparent than we are now. Now, this is something that I think the ship has sailed to change the defaults, but allowing users to configure it and changing the defaults in ambient to be less invasive may be a good idea. So, for example, in ambient, we could say, we're not going to override your server header anymore. Or something. We could bike shed what we set in ambient, but I think at least the ability to turn that off is useful for users who don't want to expose that to various clients or servers they're talking to. So this PR is just in addition to mesh config, so you can configure it globally or per proxy, and it basically says I either want the default set of headers or I want this specific set of headers, and we have a bunch of enums for the various types of headers. That's about it. So go ahead, comment, please. Thanks. Go ahead, Quat.
Yeah, I will have a problem with proposal because I think it's a bit too prescriptive. The fact that we even have to have a list of headers sounds like a big commitment. And I'm not sure I understand the problem from sidecar cases. I understand that people don't want to see headers on the gateways, and we should put more effort in making sure we don't leak any headers. But that's not an API. It's just implementation so that we don't accidentally expose internal headers.
Yeah, I mean, just because it's through a gateway doesn't mean that users want to see random additional headers added or overwritten in the case of the server header, right?
Yeah, for external gateways, but internally.
No, I mean, just because you're
useful.
internal doesn't mean you don't have opinions, right? Like we see
Yeah,
users say, I want to see the server header of my Nginx pod that runs in the cluster, right? Just because it's in the cluster doesn't change the details. I mean, I agree it's more important externally, but I don't think that means it's not important internally.
The trust model is different. I mean, we have trust inside the mesh, so we can share more stuff between sidecars and
this
clients.
is not about trust. This is about compatibility, right? The applications expect requests that look a certain way, and then they add Istio, all of a sudden the headers are changed and things break, right?
But that's normal in HTTP land. I mean, your headers are not supposed to be, canonical source of truth. You can change them. You can add them.
I mean, like one example was I set my server header in my application, server equals John server, and now I add Istio, and now the server is Istio proxy. Now I'm broken because I expected the server. And I want to turn that off.
I agree about server. I don't agree about the list of all the headers. So things like retry, that's an X dash header. It absolutely means it's basically can be ignored by everyone except us. Same applies to metadata exchange headers. I mean, they're all X dash. So they do add overhead, but that's not really what this API is for, I think, right?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you that server is the most important one, or at least the most important for internal.
Is there another header like server that we override? I thought it's just server.
I mean, no, we're adding mostly. I mean, unless they happen to already set exported client cert or something, but that's probably not the case for anyone that's really asking for this.
Okay, so I think can we just restrict it to just server, because that seems like that can actually break some clients, but other headers are all additive.
I think that adding headers is also like, it's less bad than the server one because we're modifying, but anything that we change in a request, we're going to get issues with users for compatibility, right? Now, there's some things that we change intentionally, like we do HTTP load balancing. That's something we're not going to, that's intended. There's some things that are kind of more middle ground, like lowercasing all the headers. Like there's good reasons to do that. It also breaks people, but maybe it's better to do it anyways. And that's a whole other can of worms. But there's other things like we insert all these headers. Like it's very easy to just say, no, we don't insert all these headers anymore because we configured not to, and not break their application. Any change whatsoever that we're modifying their request, we've seen continually ends up with user friction of onboarding, that their application behavior changed and they broke. So it really moves away from the goal of being able to just onboard any application and it just works. Like users, like kind of one of the goals of Ambient is that users are incrementally adopting features, right? If you want to change things, you're explicitly saying, I want HTTP processing, and then I want retries, and then I want timeouts, rather than getting the whole kitchen sink of functionality that we think you should have, like retries and timeouts by default that we also add.
Well, I agree about the latter part, but that's not about headers, right? I mean, I agree that we should not be doing things that are not allowed in terms of HTTP semantics, but we are not doing those things. We are doing things that every HTTP proxy can do. It's just some clients are a bit, peculiar about it. What I don't understand is why we need an API to support those not, fully compliant HTTP clients.
I don't think just because the spec says that you can add headers, that means that we should add headers.
Well, yes, but having an API having one API that just says add these headers is just not something you can easily implement. I mean, there's a whole bunch of features that require those headers. You cannot implement tracing without adding headers. You cannot implement telemetry without adding headers. And having a separate API and then also another API to do tracing is just not, convenient to use.
So the concern is that these headers are used for other features, and now we have kind of two places to configure one feature.
The API is not about, it's just a weird API. It's a very low level. It should be about features, not about headers. If you don't want the metadata headers, then disable telemetry. If you don't want tracing headers, then disable tracing. But if you want tracing, you shouldn't have to enable some headers.
What about something like X-Envoy attempt count? That's actually not related necessarily to adding retries, right? That's adding metadata about the retries. I mean, it's related, yes, but it's not a requirement for retries.
The only reason we have is because we have retries by default. And since everything opted in to retries, this header is sort of necessary.
Sure, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to want retries without telling the upstream that you retried with an Envoy specific header. Right, the two are related, but they're not necessarily need to be coupled. Like I want retries, but I don't want to tell the upstream that I did it with this header.
It's not for the upstream, it's for telemetry. It's so that you know that when your debug is operational, you know that retries are happening.
Okay, I mean, whatever it's used for by the user, I don't want to send it. Like
You
we
need
constantly get
telemetry for
requests
every
that
feature,
users
right?
don't want extra headers. You don't need to send set headers about every internal operation, like to do debugging.
Absolutely, you depend on this header to debug retries. I don't think we can enable this feature without having some telemetry.
So
right, and that it's just
because
every feature
I'm
needs
not saying we
telemetry.
remove the header from default install. I'm saying we give the ability to. I don't know that
No,
it's
I
our
understand,
choice to
but
say that.
if you don't want retry header, then disable retries.
We have 50, 100 things we do on a request. Should we stick a header on each of them to describe what we did? Like, that would help with debugging, right?
No, most of those headers are usually about the features we enable. We just enable a ton of features by default.
Yeah, so I'm not sure why I need to have a header saying I retried, but I don't need a header saying that I use this cluster, this listener, this route, this timeout, this load balancing policy, this endpoint, you know, whatever functionality we set in Envoy. We could have 100 headers. It would make debugging amazing, right? There's a reason we don't set all those headers because users don't want us to inject a ton of headers. I'm not sure why these headers that we have now, like why are the two features that we need to add headers for the client cert and the retry? It seems extremely arbitrary.
These headers can be raised on this server sidecar. I'm not sure why we don't expose them to the client.
Not all servers have a sidecar.
Well, that's a bit of, you know, that's again the boundary, right? That you're talking about edge. And yeah, if you do have something outside the mesh, then you probably want to have a better policy about sanitizing headers.
This
and maybe
is
you need to go.
a policy for sanitizing headers, though. That's what the intent of this PR is.
But it's not. It is nothing about the features or the topology here in this API, right? It's just erasing headers. It's a very low level API. It's a very difficult to use API because you don't even know when you're supposed to use what, right? It's like, how do you even make a connection between Envoy peer metadata exchange header and the fact that telemetry breaks?
Well, we could document what depends on the header, potentially. I will note that the peer metadata one is explicitly not in this PR because, like you said, it's a dependency for metadata exchange.
Yeah,
The
but that's
or not. Like, it's
but
not
why not,
that
right?
if you enable MTLS, you have to have X4 to client cert. You need MTLS for X4 to client cert, but you don't need X4 to client cert for MTLS. It's not the same with metadata exchange when the two are actually coupled, right?
X4 is a feature that we enabled. X4 is a client cert. It's a feature that we just turned on without having an option to turn it off. And I think we need an option to turn it off, but it's not about the header.
That's exactly what this PR is. It's adding an option to turn it off.
Right, I agree. Having option to turn off things like server and X4 cert is a good idea, but it's not about headers. It's about disabling those features. The fact that they manifest as headers is just a side effect.
So would it make sense if instead of calling the API headers, we called it features, and then removing the feature happens to remove the header?
Well, they need to be bound to the right place. I don't necessarily know exactly where, but I would imagine it's more about virtual surface or wherever they are triggered by, because you still probably want a different application depending on where you go send in request, outside or inside the mesh. Does that make sense? I mean, this is about routing, right? So it has to bound to the routing, not just some generic API.
Most of these are configured in HCM. So it's pretty hard to put them in a virtual service. Let me see, I have a prototype PR turning all these off. The only one that's really on route is the request attempt. Everything else is at the HCM level.
If we need some kind of per host or per route override for this feature, then we need to make the change to Envoy, and it's not that hard. It's just
Right. I don't think we do though. Like no one's asked for that. They've just asked for stop adding these damn Envoy headers. I don't want them. I just want my normal application requests. Like they're not thinking that granular for these types of features in my experience. I mean, unless someone else like half the people on, not half, a few people on this call specifically asked for this. So is anyone else like interested in granular request, or is it more just I want to stop mutating requests as much as possible? Like, that would be great feedback.
In general, I think the idea of an explicit link between this header has to be here because it's necessary for this feature that I also want is a reasonable thing to say. It's a good communicative principle, right? Just saying I'm going to hide all the headers for Envoy and not really understanding what the repercussions of that. Like if that's a danger of this API, I agree that with Mkuata that's a little cumbersome. Like if you don't want all these headers, then if you want XFCC, then enable the feature forward client cert details. Then they're going to say, why do I get what? Okay, I turn that on. Oh, this means I get the XFCC header because that's how it's propagated. I don't want that. I turn that off, or I live with it if I need that feature. I think that makes sense as a thing to communicate to people. And that works for me. Like that makes sense as a thing to do. I wouldn't want to decouple adding and removing headers from the features that depend on them. I think it's just a matter of communicating to people. If you want this feature, these headers will be appended to your request.
Yeah, but I think people want the features without the headers. Like just because I turn on retries doesn't mean I want to insert debugging headers for retries.
If the header doesn't need to be there for the feature to function, then we probably shouldn't add it.
Yeah,
but in a lot of cases it is, I guess.
I think there's two cases. There's the metadata exchange one, which is not part of the API because it's inherently coupled. The feature is the header, basically. And then there's request ID and tracing. But I still think you may want request ID enabled even if you don't have tracing enabled, right? Because you may not have tracing at this hop, but it's, it's hop by hop, so it's still important. I don't know that any of the other ones really meet those criteria of coupling to features.
If they don't meet the criteria of coupling to features, that's something we might want to look at them one by one. But if they don't meet the criteria of being coupled to features, we probably shouldn't add them by default. And if we want to, at that point, I guess it's more of a framing thing, right? If it's just, look, we're trying to frame this in terms of you need this header for this feature, therefore it's added. And if there are extra headers that are nice to have but not tied to any feature, we want to have a separate low-level API for those, I guess so. But I don't want to have just a scrub versus not scrub that's disconnected from actual features, which may depend on those things. So it may actually.
One thing to point out too is this proposal is not changing the defaults in sidecars because we can't really change defaults at this point. I mean, I would have changed the defaults if backwards compatibility wasn't concerned, but that's too late at this point. So.
Is there a way to add some of these headers that are not tied? Is this what this PR does? Does it add support to basically turn on and off these headers that are not bound to features, or is it mixing some that are for features and some that are not?
It doesn't have metadata exchange headers, but it does have the request ID, which is, I mean, all of them are somewhat bound to features, right? Like attempt count, if you say turn it on and then you don't have retries, it will never be set.
I think going through the list of headers specifically and saying, can we roll this up under a feature on off thing as opposed to setting it separately makes sense. And at that point, if all that's left are these are not essential but nice to have for debugging, then let's add those headers if debug logging is enabled, or like something like, or just add like a debug headers flag or something, right? It doesn't have to be anything anybody cares about unless they're debugging things.
I don't think they're debugging. Like export to client cert is super useful. It's not for debugging. It's
right. Yeah, but that again, to Coat's point, that is a feature, right? You say I want to forward client cert details. The mechanism under the hood we implement to do that is with a header, so you get the header, right? Like that makes sense to me.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like the user experiences, I send a request, I see a bunch of headers added. I don't want the headers, I go look for the API that says configure the headers, not I go look for the forward client cert feature, I go look for the debugging retry headers, I look for the overload debugging header or feature. I don't know that that's really how a user would approach this.
Well, that's because we chose defaults that are they add a lot of overhead. I mean, the defaults that come with Istio Sidecar just have tons of overhead. It's just a side effect of it. If we think that we need to reduce headers, we need to remove the features, which is, I think, part of the safe proposal, right?
We can't remove these functionalities though, and they're not coupled. Like I may want to, yes, we shouldn't have turned on retries by default, I would think. But just because I turn on retries explicitly, I don't want the header. Like that's not the same thing. Like when I turn on retries in Nginx, I don't suddenly get a header added, right? I just retry request.
I understand, but there is a reason why it's there. It's because we needed to operationalize this process. We cannot just tell people, turn on debug login and envoy and look at the printouts from application logs. We have to manage many proxies, and this header was used for that. So there is a purpose for this header, and if we want to remove it, we need to find another option to do the same thing. And it's not about the header, it's about the fact that we have retries, and the way we chose to do telemetry for retries is via header. If we don't want a header, we need to find another way to do telemetry. But fundamentally,
how does the header help for telemetry? If someone's looking at trace logs and the header happens to be there?
Well, at least at Google, we look at Stackdriver logs and we collect them perpetually, so we can see them when retries happen.
But we don't log the header anywhere.
We do log this header. We should be logging this header, and if not, that's probably oversight.
I don't know how much different systems log this header or headers in general, because there's all kind of sensitive data inside, and
we don't log every header. We'll only log the specific headers, like retry, and count.
It seems like we log user agent, exported for, authority, and request ID. Well, that's an open source. Maybe Google did something different internally. Not sure.
I mean, there is value in logging how many times have you retried, because that's kind of directly. But if we generate telemetry, I don't know if we also need. Yeah.
Isn't the point though that like that could be something that the user decides if there's value for that? And if there is no value to them and they're not logging it, then that header doesn't have to be put in there. It's not required for the feature.
Yeah, that's exactly my point. This is one of the most requested features in Istio, is the ability to stop adding these headers. And sure, like more information is useful if you want more information. But we shouldn't force that onto users. Like we should give the users the ability to configure the mesh to meet their needs, right? If we see a bunch of users saying, hey, you're breaking my application by modifying something, I don't think it's right for us to say, well, you should want that modification. Like we should meet the users where they are.
Yeah, I completely agree that everything should be opt-in and not kind of opt-out. So if the user has retries enabled and what's that particular workload and they actually want to have the logs, we should probably add it, but it should not be something that we add just because someone else may need it at some point.
Well, someone else is a vendor, and we have to support proxies that we don't have access directly, and this is the only telemetry we get about retries.
Then the vendor will need to figure out what to do for their own branch and how to, if they want to eat the cost or if they want to do something special for. But I don't think it's because a vendor wants to have an easier life supporting it. Everyone will need to pay the price.
No, it's not about paying the price. It's that every feature needs telemetry, and I don't think it's fair to say you can just enable a feature without having any telemetry. I don't think that's the right way to have a production service.
Sure, but what is the cost of the telemetry? It's again, telemetry has high currency telemetry. It's generally considered bad. You need some telemetry, but you don't need extra headers and extra storage and extra cost. if it can be done in different ways, or so anything expensive should be opt-in. That's my point. I mean, if the user has to pay for it as storage cost, as bandwidth and everything else, probably they should opt into it.
Yeah, I understand, but I mean, what I would understand is decoupling telemetry of the feature from the feature itself. If you're willing to pay the price of retries, which will add overhead, a lot of overhead potentially, I think it's okay to take a cost of a header. But if you don't want that overhead, then disable retries.
Can we have retries with just a counter, just number of retries without the header? Can they implement it that way?
No, it's just a debugging header saying which retry attempt it is. That's all it says. It's first of all, it's a proprietary X-envoy header. It's not, it shouldn't be overlapping with anything. And it's just a number. It's not much overhead. Like literally 1 byte on the wire. I don't understand why it's such a big deal.
Telemetry can be a metric that we generate how many retries have been generated, which is just a metric generated by Prometheus. And generally, that should be enough. It can be just in the log, we put some information, access log is enabled, but I don't know if header is really the critical one.
I have to go back in history, but there is a reason why this was added. It's for the server to know which retry attempt. It's not for the client to know. The server knows which retry attempt client uses.
And it does something with this information?
I need to recall the history.
Let's find out.
Yeah, it was born from the operating envoys. It wasn't just added just because. It was found to be useful, and we need to understand why. And I think the use is telemetry, and we need to understand it can replace it with something else.
Yeah, that's a problem. We added a lot of stuff because we thought it's useful, but I don't think we got actual feedback. John?
This predates Istio. This header predates Istio. It was before even.
Yeah, I want to time box this because I want to make sure we can address the first one, which we skipped because Costin wasn't here. It would be great if we could go back and say what the value is. Although even if it's the most useful thing in the world, I still think we should be able to turn it off. But we can take that offline on the PR maybe. Can we go to back to the first topic, or?
We can, but we only have 3 minutes left. Is that sufficient?
I hope so.
Yeah.
So, Costin, this was about the metric expiry, and we talked a lot about how, in general, what we should do for feature flags and whatnot in Istio. This is specifically for this PR today. What should this PR do? My pitch was that everything today is through the global envars. This one should be no different. You weren't here to defend it, so it didn't seem fair to say that. So, what do you think?
So I don't think it's true that everything is through global vars. There are a lot of things that are through annotations on the pod. And usually for very experimental things, that's fine. And I don't mind if it's a global, if it's just experimental, if someone wants to play with it in a sandbox and never turn it in production, that's fine. But usually that's not what happens. People enable it globally. For things that we expect people to start using, we need to be more careful. And annotation on a pod or it's far more, kind of opt-in like you said earlier for the header.
Isn't that kind of something that would be handled by canaries though? Like my worry specifically about doing annotations is that it's actually, like we've been trying to make our XDS decoupled from proxy specific information. It's actually a lot more complicated to not do global, especially for something that's an experiment.
I agree, it's more complicated, but it's also safer. And canaries is not the panacea that solves all the problems in the world because, again, canaries are not exactly the same as production, and it's revision-based upgraded in reality is used by very few people and used properly by even fewer. So I don't think the fact that in theory someone could do perfect rollout with canary and everything is a justification to just turn it on globally and.
Yeah, I mean, we're still having them do a canary, right? Because this is not really a feature that they're saying, I want this feature on this pod, but not this other one. It's more like stop out of memorying, and we're just not sure it's stable yet. So it's
yeah. It's a canary. It's going to be a canary, but on the pod, because how do you do a canary? Because this may cause all kind of weird problems down the road in different other systems that analyze the metrics.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel it's weird to say, like, you should not use this feature in production. So it's experimental, right? So why do we need safe rollout for a non-production environment?
By the way, experimental, that means different things to different people. I mean, there are features that are, production ready, but you need to start adopting them slowly. And there are toy things that you should never use in production. Not all experiments are not meant to production. In Google, we have all kinds of experiments that are actually rolled out to Googlers, to dog fooders, to 1% of users. There are experiments as well, not.
All right. I mean, I don't feel that strongly. So if we want to do it per pod, then we can do per pod.
I don't feel that strongly for this one as well. I think, again, it's, but in general, as a principle for experimentation, we should consider far more the need for, long-term experimentation where, a feature is tested over a month with a percentage of workloads to see if anything goes wrong, instead of cramming everything in the one-day upgrade process where Istio is rolled out, and for a short term you have a Canary Istio with global options, and hopefully things will crash at that point.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think you and I have a kind of philosophical difference. I like things to be consistent, and you're rather consistently bad, and you'd rather them be inconsistently good.
I don't think we have a disagreement.
Here.
I don't have we have a disagreement. I just have a different experience with things going bad at different times. I mean, it's because again, it's a problem. The Canary for Istio revision-based upgrade is usually few hours at best.
Yeah. All right. So I think we need an answer for this PR because it's been hanging for a while. What should we do per pod?
Let's merge it globally with global. It's fine. It's again we need to solve the problem long term and agree on changing the philosophy and kind of the how we do things is not about this particular PR. I'm not trying to block any PR in general. It's just trying to start a discussion.
Yeah. Also, you didn't see it, but the doc below for Whitney is all about this to some extent. So. Well,
yeah,
it's not exactly, but you should read it. So
I'll read it. Sorry, I had a meeting, not very pleasant.
Yeah, no problem. All right. So I think that covers things. We can move on to the next meeting. Sorry for going a little over. I'll also summarize that on the PR in case it's.
Well, we usually don't start the next meeting until 5 after anyway, so I think we're good. So
three more minutes to bike sit.
Yes, unless you don't want to use any bathroom break. Also, on this one specifically, John, you're going to take it from here.
Yeah, I'll PR or I'll comment on the PR.
Okay, sounds good. Then I will see you guys in the other meeting in a couple of minutes. See you, everyone.